Well, I was saying yesterday how big Lewis Hamilton's task was at the Brazilian Grand Prix, and that was before we knew that he's going to have to start the sprint race from the back. That was when we thought he just had a five-place grid penalty, nothing compared to what he had today, and would have to start P6 if he got the pole in qualifying, which he did. And I made the point yesterday that although there are some nice long straights with tight corners at the end of them at Interlagos, it's very difficult, given the way you approach those straights, actually to do any real overtaking. It's a difficult circuit on which to overtake, in other words. And so it proved in the sprint race on Saturday. Virtually no overtakes, apart from off the line, when obviously the soft Pirelli tyre, and about half the field opted for the soft, proved to be much better and have more grip off the line than the medium. No surprise there. But hang on a second. No, Carl Hamilton passed 15 cars off the line and throughout the race on medium tyres to finish P5. He alone was doing the overtaking in the sprint race. So it was, I was right, but then there was Lewis proving I was completely wrong. And this is because Lewis is this amazing driver in traffic. And it's not just track craft, and it's not just knowing where to place the car. This is I don't know, what can I say? It's a Nigel Mansell-like adrenaline, which is fueled not only by the people at the British Grand Prix, but it's also fueled by cars around him and difficult situations. Now, Lewis could have had two options today. He faced two options, I think, after everything had happened, when he got that penalty to move to the back of the grid because of the 85mm restriction on the DRS that was not met in Parc Fermé. And we'll get onto that in a minute. I think it was probably a correct decision. Everybody out there probably does, except Lewis, I would imagine. But, I think when you get that, you can react in two ways. You can just go off the planet with anger, and it will affect your driving. And I can think of several drivers in the past who would have reacted that way, particularly multi-world champions who have seen it all, done it all, been there, done there. It would be like, okay, if that's what they want, this is the end of motor racing for me, sort of thing. But it wasn't that for Lewis Hamilton. He was this young kid, again, with Mercedes saying, we're really sorry, Lewis, it's happened to you. And Lewis putting his arm around his guys and saying, look, it happens, not my fault, not your fault. Let's not get into the blame thing. Let's make the most of this and let's go motor racing. And that little cameo is actually what Lewis Hamilton is all about. And we saw it in the race. As I say, just look at the number of passes he made and how relatively easy he made them look compared with everybody else in the field. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just look at what happened. Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez both started on the medium tyre. They didn't. Red Bull obviously suggested that they should do that. And that was a function of natural conservatism because of the position they're in for the championship. The soft tyre was always going to be a bit of a question mark. However, on the other side of the coin, the sprint race on Saturday was much later in the day than the Grand Prix is going to be, and the ambient temperature was not that great. It was only about 17 degrees. You could see spectators and people in the pit lane wearing jackets. So that needed to be taken into account. But even so, if you were Red Bull, you were thinking, now, given the way Max has done a lot of really good laps on the medium tyre, and given the overheating tyre issues that he felt on Friday, the medium has got to be the way to go. And we'll back that up with Sergio Perez on the medium tyre as well. Then look at Mercedes. They did exactly the right thing. Lewis is in trouble. He's at the back of the grid. Put him on the medium tyre because you just don't know how hard he's going to cane the tyre. And it doesn't really matter how quick he is off the line because he's got Hasses around him and a few others, and he should be able to get those off the line anyway into the first corner, and so it proved. But put Valtteri Bottas, who hadn't had a great Friday, on the soft tyre, even though he was going to be on the dirty side of the grid, just to see if from that side, on that inside run down to turn one, and it's a really important part of the track to be, even though it's dirty, it's a great place to be in terms of defence, because the way that corner camber changes going in, it's really difficult to do anything from the outside, even if you're abreast of the guy on the inside. And so that was a logical choice, really, to put Valtteri on the soft tyre. But I'd be surprised if anybody at Mercedes really expected the soft tyre to last the full 24 laps in terms of consistent levels of grip. And the two teams made those decisions, obviously, this morning, because in the 1 hour session that preceded the sprint race, we saw Max doing an 18-lap run on the medium tyre, really quick, 12.8, 13.0, and Sergio Perez doing an 11-lap run and not much slower either. He was a lot slower with lighter fuel, But Sergio and Max both feeling very confident on that medium run. Let's have a look at then what Mercedes did. They did their long runs, of course, on the soft tyre, the tyre that we're going to use in the sprint. And Lewis was not really very quick on that soft tyre. 12.7 he was doing, did a 10-lap run, whereas Valtteri Bottas 12.3. So even though Mercedes were on the soft tyre, they're going about the same speed as Red Bull, who were on the medium tyre. But of course, then what happened? The track got cooler and the soft tyre came into its own, and the medium tyre was a difficult tyre to get up to temperature, unless you're Lewis Hamilton, that is, in another world, on another planet. And that's really how the race was won and lost. But Valtteri Bottas made perfect use of the soft tyre off the line, got slightly ahead in the run down to turn one. He's on the inside, the dirty side of the road. Max can do nothing about it. And after that, Valtteri won the race. A beautiful drive by Valtteri Bottas. It's the same thing we've been saying for a while now about Valtteri in this second half of the season, in the context that he's been fired by Mercedes and is going to Alfa Romeo next year. You know, what he's doing now definitely will be making a lot of people think, really a shame for this guy to be leaving. He just drove beautifully, did everything he needed to do in terms of mitigating the damage for Lewis Hamilton as well. And Max just sat there behind the Mercedes, hoping, of course, that Valtteri's tyres were going to go off at some point before lap 24, before the checkered flag, but they didn't. And with about 7 laps to go, I guess, Christian Horner got on the radio to Max and said, "Bide your time, Max, bide your time," as if Red Bull were expecting those red tyres to deteriorate. But they didn't. I mean, Valtteri did a very good job to nurse them, but he did a very good job of sustaining pressure throughout the lap. And of course, as we said yesterday, the Mercedes did have and does have a top speed advantage of about 6 kilometers over the Red Bull Honda. And that's not going anywhere near the issue of the DRS thing that we'll get on to in a minute, because it was exactly the same top speeds for Valtteri and Lewis Hamilton yesterday. So it's not as if Lewis had any sort of advantage from what happened overnight. So Max Verstappen, I think, was a bit stunned to finish second. He'll probably be thinking, yeah, but in the race, it's going to be hotter. We're going to be okay. Let's just see what happens. I'm on the dirty side of the road, but it is the inside. That's probably what he'd be thinking. And then there was Ferrari, who also did a very good job of splitting their two drivers, putting Carlos Sainz on the soft tyre. Carlos has looked really good throughout Friday, very good this morning as well, very consistent on his runs, quicker throughout his runs, within a tenth or two than Charles Leclerc, right on top of his driving, really, really good around Interlagos. And they started him on the soft tyre, and he made very, very good use of that. Indeed, he actually got second place from Max going into turn 4 on the opening lap, got down the inside. Max tried to stay with him around the outside of turn 4, then eventually had to give the corner up, ran out over the runoff area. Good job for him, there's a runoff area there, allowing Carlos into P2. Max got him again. At that point, you would think, the soft tyre probably is going to go off, especially on a Ferrari. And there was Sergio Perez, therefore, behind Carlos for the rest of the race. But Sergio, as I say, he's a great defender, not the greatest attacking driver in the world. He had a couple of goes on the Ferrari down the inside into turn 1, but it was never going to be a real pass. And there was no aggression from Sergio around the rest of the lap. It was just sort of waiting to see if the tyres were going to go off or if a gap would magically materialise, which it never did. Carlos drove really well and got P3 ahead of Sergio Perez. And into P5, amazingly, then came Lewis Hamilton. Let's just talk about the drivers that he overtook in 24 laps around Interlagos. Okay, off the line, the two Hasses of Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. I shouldn't make too big a deal about that. Kimi Raikkonen finished 18th, but he touched or was taken out into a spin by his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi, a turn 1 schmozzle of the type I mentioned yesterday. So that didn't really count. He got past Kimi. Then the two Williams, and got to say here, Nicholas Latifi finished the race ahead of George Russell, 16th and 17th. We didn't even see Lewis going past them. It was so quick. Then Lewis came up behind Yuki Tsunoda and Fernando Alonso, and you thought, this is not going to be easy because Yuki's Yuki, and Fernando's Alpine, very high top speed, and he's probably going to be a DRS benefactor anyway, so it's going to be difficult for Lewis with any sort of top speed advantage to do anything about it. So he sat there for a couple of laps, and in terms of the pass on Fernando, it was really good. He just got a great run out of the last corner, and he was almost alongside him before they got to the last two kinks down the inside. He did most of his passing that way, Lewis. A couple of them were into turn one, but most of them basically were just getting an amazingly good run out of that last corner, which is all about mid-corner rotation, getting the car as straight as possible, not losing any time with the back end doing this, and then just choosing which side he was going to go past based on what sort of defence the drivers were going to have. Some of them went down the left, so Lewis just went straight down the outside. Daniel Ricciardo being a very good example. Lewis down the outside into turn one. So just to go over that list again of the drivers that Lewis Hamilton passed, it was Yuki Tsunoda, Lance Stroll, Antonio Giovinazzi, Fernando Alonso as just described, Daniel Ricciardo as just described, Sebastian Vettel, same thing. You thought Esteban Ocon might have given him a hard time, but no, straight past him. That was also a thing coming out of the last corner. And Pierre Gasly, had his soft tyres had gone off by the time Lewis got to him, so it wasn't really a fight, and he just gave up quite easily. Charles Leclerc, same thing. He didn't have a good day at all on the medium. He just couldn't get those tyres to work on the Ferrari, so no grip there until then that put Lewis in P7 with Lando Norris in front of him with about 4 laps to go, and you thought, yeah, no, he's not going to get past Lando because that's a different deal. You know, Lando Norris, who started on the medium tyre like Lewis, you thought, nah, it's not going to happen. But it did into turn one. Just superb. So let's look at it now. Lewis Hamilton, if this wasn't a sprint race weekend and it had just been Friday and this was qualifying today, presumably Lewis would have got the pole, as he did yesterday, and now they'd be in Parc Ferme and they'd be checking the DRS gaps on Lewis's Mercedes. And they'd be announcing late tonight, early tomorrow morning, that Lewis Hamilton's going to be starting the Brazilian Grand Prix from the back of the grid. So in terms of mitigating things that could have got wrong, I suppose from Lewis's point of view, you've got to say it's great that we got the sprint race. He finished 5th. He's got a 5-place grid penalty. He's going to start 10th. He's going to start absolutely in the middle of the pack tomorrow for the Brazilian Grand Prix instead of the back of the grid. Now, you could argue, if you're a cynic and you've been around too long, that's exactly where you don't want to be going into the first corner for the Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos, that turn one for a Grand Prix. You don't want to be P10 because there's so much traffic, front wing end plates, etc., etc. But Lewis, he knows that. And what we saw today is a Lewis Hamilton that just has this astonishing ability, this track craft of being able to position the car exactly where he wants it, to do the pass, to read the driver in front, to know exactly what they're going to do next. And that's one of his greatest skills. I said a while ago, earlier in the year, that I didn't think Lewis understood Max's driving as well as he has in the past, other drivers with whom he's had big races. I think probably, I don't know, nothing to do with me, of course, but I think that was a wake-up call for Lewis. And I think he really, really showed today how much he does know about the other drivers and how much he can read the body language of the car in front, the car that he's going to pass next. It was just an incredible display of driving, I thought, on a day when there wasn't much overtaking. As I said, it's not easy to overtake at Interlagos. That's the amazing thing. So let's just talk about those penalties. It wasn't a performance. I mean, the rule is there for performance reasons. Obviously, there's got to be a limit to the gap that the DRS can have, and it's 85 millimeters. And it was bigger than that. It was bigger when it was measured with load. It wasn't bigger when it was measured statically, and it certainly wasn't measured in such a way that indicated there would be any sort of advantage. But a rule is a rule is a rule. And so the stewards correctly, I think, took the decision to do something punitive and put Lewis at the back of the grid. The interesting thing for me, actually, are the stewards, because in days past, relatively recently, I think, you'd say, these stewards, who are these stewards? What do they know about it? The interesting thing here is that the 4 stewards are actually, 2 of them are Formula One drivers. The third is Tim Mayer, who's the son of Teddy Mayer, one of the co-founders of McLaren. So he knows his way around. He's been a steward for a long time. And the fourth is Matteo Parini. Now, I didn't know Matteo, but he's got a lot of history with the Italian Federation as a steward. So it's Matteo is a non-driver, but then you've got 2 drivers, which is quite unusual. And Vittorio Luzzi is one. He was the driver steward, if you like. And we know world karting champion, if you're going to have a Lewis Hamilton mate, it's going to be Antonio Luzzi, I would imagine. And the other driver was Roberto Moreno. And it's unusual to have 2 drivers, but Roberto was there because he's a Brazilian steward at other events. So he qualified as a sort of national local steward. It's all really weird for me because I just saw Roberto 2 weeks ago at the Formula Ford Festival Brands Hatch, where he was racing a 40-year-old Van Diemen, and he'd made the little transporters in the little area where he was look like the 1980s. It was just brilliant. Roberto, a real racer, very, very good driver as well, really nice guy. And to have him as one of the stewards, alongside Vittoluzzi, alongside Tim Mayer, and then you've got Matteo Perini. You know, those four guys, if those four guys thought that was the correct thing to do, I'm prepared to go along with it, because to me that's a really good bunch of FIA stewards. Really doesn't come much better than that, to be honest. And I know all of them would have been absolutely down the middle objective on this. And so that's all I think we can say about it. You know, I've talked about how Lewis reacted to it, and we saw that today. You know, 15 places in the sprint race. The other thing, of course, was that Max Verstappen got fined €50,000 for touching and looking at the rear wing of the Mercedes, which is obviously something that Red Bull have asked him to do, to check gaps and things like that. In the same way, I guess, that Lewis probably does the same, and Valtteri and all the teams probably get most of the drivers to do that sort of thing. Most of the teams would. There is a rule to say you shouldn't do that, but it's kind of not really taken that seriously. But in this situation, of course, with Lewis's rear DRS and rear wing under examination, under the microscope, to have Max touching bits of the rear wing and Lewis potentially having that penalty, obviously that came into focus as well. So Max got the €50,000 fine, which basically is nothing for Max Verstappen or Red Bull, of course, but it is a rap on the knuckles that will prevent and stop anybody else ever doing that again, I think. It's you know, it is a bit of a tradition in the Parc Fermé, and when you get out of the car at the end of a race, in the qualifying, you always want to get out of the car, drivers, look at the tyres, look at various things. I suppose to touch things is a newish thing. I guess that, you know, you look at wings, you look at various bits and bobs, but you don't actually touch them really. And I guess that's grown up, and it's a good thing that they're stopping that, I believe. So let's have a look at what we've got tomorrow then, the grid, with everybody free to start on whatever tyres they want. That's going to be a really interesting thing. I guess Valtteri Bottas is going to say, bring on the soft tyres, and why not after what happened for him today? But it is going to be hotter, and we did have those warning bells on Friday when it was hotter about where it was, where the temperature is going to be on Sunday. So that's one thing that Mercedes will have to bear in mind. I suspect Lewis, they might try and put him on harder tyre just to get him to do a longer stint early on to see if he can do some passing in the pit lane like that. And then Max, I think, as I said yesterday, I still think he's found that sweet spot in terms of the ambient that we're going to have tomorrow and the balance of the Red Bull with the higher fuel load. But he is P2 now, but, you know, he is on the inside going into turn one, and it will be hotter. And in theory, he will have no issues with grip off the line. So there we are. It was been an eventful day, a momentous day, perhaps, in terms of what may happen tomorrow and how that may affect the championship and the result of the championship. If Max goes on to win the World Championship, there's a fair chance he will, of course, a pretty good chance. What happened in Brazil will be remembered as one of the big moments of the season. And I guess the decision taken by the stewards as a result of what happened in Parc Fermé will be seen as one of the pivotal events of the year. I don't think that should reflect badly on them, but I certainly think it will reflect on them. See you tomorrow.
It took me a little while. The first day I came out of the plane straight into the race car. But I was a little overwhelmed initially, that's the right word. But then I caught up with it, and things started to go better and better. We had a couple of issues that we fixed it, and then I'm now improving every time I go out.
But this car is how old?
41 years old.
And you're only, what, about 35, so you've got to catch up.
Oh, well, I'm 62, but that doesn't count, does it?